Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Balls Radio with Phil Dobbie.
Another man has gone mad in the United States with news coming through of that gun shooting in California. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little later with Richard Kazimer. He is our Balls Radio US correspondent. But first of all, Richard, 4 Orthodox Jewish rabbis, this sounds like a joke, but it's not. 4 Orthodox Jewish rabbis have been plotting to kidnap men to force them to divorce their wives. You couldn't write this stuff, could you? What's this all about?
This has got to be one of the most bizarrely confusing crimes, especially for an atheist like myself who's been married 4 times. New Jersey federal prosecutors have indicted 4 Orthodox Jewish rabbis and one of their sons after an FBI sting operation nabbed the group for conspiracy, get this, to kidnap Jewish men for the purpose of forcing them to divorce their wives. What? Yeah. Here's how the plot was supposed to work. The rabbis presented themselves as, quote, special rabbis to Jewish wives who were seeking a divorce. Now, according to Orthodox Jewish law, a wife must get a written consent from her husband before they can get a divorce. Right. The consent is called a get. Now, should the husband refuse, these rabbis were going to nab the guy and hold him until they got the get. If they didn't get the get, they would then beat the guy and also use electric cattle prods until the get was got.
Cattle prods. So, yeah. As I say, you cannot write this stuff. So this is like the Jewish hit squad who just happen to be rabbis. It sounds like something out of Monty Python. Can you imagine? Did they have a Ford panel van? Were they sort of like jumping out the back of the panel van to grab these guys? I mean...
Well, here's the deal, though. The rabbis themselves were not the heavy hitters. They weren't involved in the actual kidnapping and any of the torture. They hired thugs for all the wet work. But there was money to be made because the going rate for the wives, they would pay the rabbis $10,000 up front, and then the rabbis would pay the other guy, the thugs, $50,000 or $60,000 for all the other heavy stuff, which they would then extract from the wives. Now, of course, the whole thing, I couldn't find a lot of information on this story. It was out there and then it disappeared. But attorneys for these rabbis, they're all denying any wrongdoing. However, 4 other people involved with the rabbis have pleaded guilty to extortion, so you know there's some crime there. If convicted, these rabbis can face up to life in prison for trying to get the get. Can't make it up. I'm telling you.
We seem to talk about spying almost every week. Normally, though, it's the U.S. spying on itself. But we know a lot of it goes on in China, of course. And your spy agency has now managed to narrow down Chinese hackers to 5 men out of a country of, a billion people or whatever. They've got it down to 5. That's good going.
That's all you need. Well, it's been long suspected by the U.S. intelligence agencies, a variety of them. But China has emphatically denied that they have any involvement in the hacking that's been going on over here in U.S. companies. But the Justice Department narrowed it down to 5 soldiers in the Chinese Liberation Army. So this week, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder levied charges against 5 members of the PLA's cyber unit for hacking into the networks of the likes of Westinghouse Electric, U.S. Steel, and some other major companies. Now, all these companies are direct competitors of Chinese industry, so that's the link right there. The indictments, however, are all purely show, considering the Chinese government isn't about to hand over the 5 men, let alone admit to any of this stuff. But what's involved? These guys were hacking into these companies, stealing emails, strategy memos detailing upcoming negotiations with Chinese enterprises, and also dropping some malware into their systems. China claims all the charges are fabricated and that it grossly violates, quoting now, the basic norms that govern international relations, and it jeopardizes U.S.-China cooperation. And by basic norms, Phil, we're talking of China referring to the accepted practice of all countries all over the world spying on each other for military information.
Yeah,
but this
is corporate. This is corporate spying.
Yes,
which I'm sure happens all over the world as well, if we're honest about it.
Industrial espionage, that's been going along for as long as they've had industries.
Yeah.
Now, what's on the other side of the coin here is that Edward Snowden had disclosed some time ago the information that he had stolen, that the U.S. also conducted cyber attacks on Chinese firms. So suddenly the issue of net neutrality seems pretty petty. So where this is going to go is nowhere.
Yeah, more of the same, continuing for eternity. Now, in the US, of course, it's not the hacking. Well, it is hacking, of course, is a concern in the US as it is everywhere. But monitoring, of course, is the big concern. Who is watching you? And the latest on this is this fusion center for tracking people who dare to protest.
Fusion center. It sounds also like a cooking show. This is part of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's arsenal to keep this country safe from threats against our freedoms, or some are claiming threats in our right to exercise these freedoms. The department has set up some information gathering fusion centers, a nouveau nuevo term, in states and urban areas where citizens are more prone to exercise their constitutional rights for public assembly and peaceful protests like the Occupy movements we saw a few years ago. DHS is promoting the centers as saying that they are serving as focal points within the state and local environment for receipt, analysis, and gathering and sharing of threat-related information between the federal governments and the state and local authorities, and also tribal and territorial and private sector partners. They're getting information from people who may potentially cause disruptive harm, not necessarily violence, but
I love that word,
anything
potential,
that runs the gamut.
Yeah.
And what they mean...
So,
go ahead.
Potential means basically what they're saying is then if you've gone to any of these protests, we're watching you. We've got your files.
Yes.
You're on our books from now on.
And what they mean by private sector partners, that is code for corporate entities. And one of the fusion centers gathered information to alert authorities of expected shopping center disruption during major holiday events by all those ne'er-do-wells that offer customers advice on responsible use of credit cards. So those people were targeted. And nothing has been done, though, because there are 78 centers across the country in these major markets. But a 2012 Senate subcommittee released information that these fusion centers do absolutely nothing. They provide no information of any value whatsoever.
All right.
But it's government money at work.
Just basically a job creation scheme for nosy Parkers, isn't it, really?
Yes.
When it gets down to it. Now, I noticed on your Skype message, you're saying, is it just me or is winter dragging on longer than ever this year in the United States? Whereas here in Australia, summer is dragging on forever. We've had, we're late May, we've had days around 26 degrees this last week, and it's going to continue for another week as well. But you're always, it seems, just on the verge of an ice age, and global warming apparently is not going to make it any better for you. In fact, it could make the US colder, they reckon.
Seriously, Phil, you want me to spend our quality time together explaining simple physics? Am I to assume that you're suggesting that the listeners of this illustrious Balls Radio are as ignorant of the facts of global climate change as, let's say, somebody who gets their information from Fox News or Australian Talkback Radio? Is that what you want me to do,
You're
Phil?
right. We do have a more intelligent audience. That's right.
Well,
so what you're saying is it's not all about warming. Global warming doesn't mean it's all going to get warmer. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Let me walk you through this. Of course, global
step by
warming...
step. Take it slowly. Don't go
global warming causes heavier snow in winters. As the increasing warmer water evaporates in the Pacific, it goes up in the atmosphere, gets into the jet stream, it freezes when the temperature reaches below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it turns into more massive snowstorms, and then it falls down on us. And during these snowstorms, when there's no clear skies, it then stays colder. So this is what global climate change is about, not global warming. Don't get confused with a change in the weather to the change in the climate. So this is the way it is. End of story. Move on.
Interesting thing about that is that we had when we had a drought, there was a big belief that climate change was an issue here in Australia. When the drought was broken, all of a sudden, interest in climate change diminished, and it became a very hard sell for our Prime Minister. Hence, helped contribute to a change in government. So climate or the weather forecast is helping determine politicians that we choose these days. It's a bit of a worry, isn't it? Really, I think you're right. We all need to read more on this.
We have a saying here in New England that if you don't like the weather, wait a minute.
Yeah. That's what they say in New Zealand as well. They manage to have 4 seasons in one day, but they have it's not in consecutive periods of time. They manage to have 4 seasons in one day at the same time. It can be raining, sunshine, and you look over the road and it's snowing. Seems I don't know how they do it.
Well, they also produced Crowded House, so I'm good with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. But they also produced Russell Crowe. So now, abortions harder to get in the South. I'm surprised you could even get an abortion in the southern states.
Yes. Well, following the regressive lead of Republican-governed states like Texas, Alabama, and Mississippi, Louisiana legislature passed a bill that requires doctors who perform abortions in private clinics to also have admitting privileges in the state's hospitals. Now, hospitals can and do refuse to perform abortions, and they deny privilege to any medical professional who does. So what this law does, in effect, is it forces the closure of 3 of Louisiana's 5 abortion clinics. Moreover, it denies the state's women affordable health care, as well as limiting access to their constitutional right as guaranteed by Roe v. Wade, which made abortion legal in the United States in 1973. This is all part and parcel in the continuation of the Republicans' war on women here in the United States, and also that is so prevalent in southern Republican control states. And it's why the GOP is so adamant in preventing any Muslim community enacting Sharia law. And it's because it directly competes with fundamentalist Christian law that pretty much mirrors the Taliban. The right loves the fetus, but they hate the baby and the mother. Examples being the cuts in the state's health care and education. So it's crazy.
So do you think the Republicans, if they got a chance, do you think that's on the cards, that if you had a Republican government for a couple of terms, that they would try and abolish abortions nationally?
Absolutely. That is part of their national platform. Every time they get elected as a president, one of their goals is to stack the Supreme Court with conservative judges and then to reverse or repeal Roe v. Wade. Can they do it? Yes. Will they do it? Probably not. But the reason that the states do this, Phil, and why it never comes up as a referendum for the voters is because as much as your neighbor, as you love your neighbor will not vote in your best interest. They are voting for themselves. So that's why the states enact this legislation and not hold it up to the voters. However, you are seeing a trend over here, especially where it comes for the reversing the bans on gay marriages, is that if a state bans gay marriage or bans abortion, people can then go to the state or federal Supreme Courts and have those rulings overturned as being unconstitutional. And we are seeing a trend over here in every state that had a gay marriage ban and then was sued and the ban was reversed. So I would not be surprised if you would see that these states would also have some challenges in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about people voting for just for themselves. There's been a bit of a change in the political climate here in Australia, as you've probably picked up. I know it's not covered anywhere outside the boundaries of this country, but I know you've got an interest in what goes on in Australia. The attitude now it seems to have shifted very much since we've been given a very tough budget. It seems like people are more concerned, not about how it impacts themselves, but a lot of people are concerned about how it impacts others, and people saying, this is just not fair, this budget, and that is good on Tony Abbott for making people realise that if you push hard enough, people will start to react. Now people are realizing it is unfair and they're talking out against it. Even some of my more conservative friends are saying this is not a fair budget. So it just shows you can push too far sometimes, and you reap the consequences.
Well, that's what happens over here too. When you see the Tea Party movement, and which has now been co-opted by the very right-leaning Republican, the GOP, because they got their asses handed to them a few elections ago when Tea Party candidates were winning because they were saying the Republicans were not right enough. We had a brief midterm election a few weeks ago, and the Tea Party candidates lost big time. However, the Republican candidates won because they took a more right-leaning way. What I'm getting to is that what the Tea Party was doing was they was doing the us against them in getting things passed, like cuts in budgets and municipalities and things in education and whatnot. And then when these policies are enacted, these draconian policies are enacted by the people that they've elected, it does affect them. Because you're not left out.
Yeah.
You do become the them that the us is against.
Yeah,
So
maybe that's why. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it is self-interest at the end of the day. I'm going to look after my neighbour because one day I might be affected too. Yeah, good point. Now, Elliot Rogers, he is the young guy who went on the shooting spree, basically because he couldn't get laid. Looks like mum and dad had given him a nice car, obviously fairly wealthy by the looks of it, but that wasn't enough for him. Is this going to be... there's not a lot we can say about this because this sort of thing obviously just keeps on happening from time to time in the United States, and every time there's a sort of like a bit of a backlash, but not a huge backlash against the NRA. Is anything going to happen, or is this just is it just going to be brushed under the carpet and we're going to forget about it over time till it happens again?
Well, we'll see as the story unfolds the mental capacity of the gentleman. So we'll see what's going to happen. But the NRA always will come out and say it's the parents' fault for being irresponsible. It's the medical profession's fault for not taking care of this kid. It's not the gun manufacturers. It's not the gun sellers. It's somebody else's fault. The fact that he used a gun and not a frying pan says a lot, but it's always someone else's fault when it comes to the NRA.
Fairly hard to kill 6 people with a frying pan, isn't it, really? I think after you've banged one person over the head, someone's going to be there to stop you. It's just...
Unless you've eaten some of my ex-wife's cooking. There is that. So
that can kill a lot of people in one go, can it? I think might be a good point to leave it. Richard Kazimer in the United States, thank you. See you again next week.
All right, my friend. Take care.